Hi, everybody. Michaela O'Donnell here today to talk about inner work. This is terminology that we use quite a bit at the De Pree Center. And this video is just a little bit of what we mean by it. So many of us have been there. We've been there in complex, difficult decision-making moments, whether it's all eyes on us or having to make hard decisions that impact people's lives or not quite getting it right and feeling kind of awful about it. Um, those moments, those sort of high stakes, stressful moments, how we perceive them, how we decide to move in light of them, and eventually how we um, take take what happened and keep going have a lot to do with who we are becoming on the inside. Okay. It's very, very easy to get caught up in the quick motion of all the things we have to do and our to-do list and the decisions and the people that we're accountable to and responsible for. But so much of what enables us to show up in those moments in which things have to happen, whether they're high stakes and complex or just things that don't feel well or things that feel like wonderful opportunities and progress, is how much our inner life has developed. So at the De Pree Center, we've actually spent decades walking with leaders across the lifespan: first, third leaders, second, third leaders, third leaders, as they transition from becoming new to work to maybe mid-level executive to senior leadership with lots of responsibility into retirement, or the young entrepreneur who sort of gets going and is doing everything themselves and has to grow into delegation and trusting others, and then eventually has to sometimes let go because of successes that they've had. And we've learned this along the way. The inner life, what's happening inside, is not an add-on. It's not a nice to, it's not something for the especially spiritual or the extra contemplative folks among us. It's a foundational piece of how people who profess the name of Jesus show up in the workplace. All right. We believe, our faith says, that God is transforming us day by day into more mature followers, into people who can walk in the way of wisdom of Jesus. And that, where does that happen? It happens in those external crucible moments that I described earlier, but a lot of it happens in reflection on those tough moments. All right. What exactly do we mean by inner work? Let's start there. So the simplest way to think about it is the task of paying attention to what's happening on the inside of us. This includes desires, it includes fears, it includes anxieties, motivations, and even our sense of calling, our sense of what God is up to, and our sense of how we are connecting to others. The goal then is that any external work we would do in the world, whether we have some formal leadership position or we're exercising leadership among friend groups or in our community or as parents, right? That our external work that we do in the world would flow from that internal work that God is doing in us. So the internal work of paying attention to what's going on and assuming that God is active in that space, not just for us individually, for all of us individually and all of us together. Okay. We believe that God is at work forming people and growing people. And that's a really pretty profound theological statement. Where does this theological statement come from? What does the Bible say about our inner work? We have a whole devotional series in our Life for Leaders that's really wonderful. You can go through, like, I think it's 20, 21 days. I don't have the number off the top of my head. Sorry. 20, 21 days of devotional reflections that help you dig into a variety of passages that take apart this idea of inner work and what happens to us as people as we engage in it. But I just want to read one passage to you today. And this comes from 2 Corinthians 4:17 through 18. So Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, and there's just all kinds of stuff happening in Corinth. And maybe you're familiar with the church at Corinth, but in the middle of all that batting, he says, "So we do not lose heart, even though our outer nature is wasting away," right? That would be our physical, literally our physical selves. our inner nature is being renewed day by day. This is such an interesting juxtaposition. As we age, our bodies often decline. I don't mean that we can't do things as we're older, but that's the trajectory we're on. But also, as we age and we grow in the faith, the text says here that our inner lives sharpen and are renewed and mature. It's just a really beautiful juxtaposition. Okay, so for this slight momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure, because we look not at what can be seen, but what cannot be seen. For what can be seen is temporary, and what cannot be seen is eternal. And I do think that what God is doing inside of us so that we can show up as people, loving our neighbors and seeking truth and justice and goodness and beauty and mercy and all of those beautiful things of God, I think that's eternal work that's happening. So I don't know, maybe this sounds kind of weird or just abstract still. If you're kind of like, what is my inner work? How do I do that? There's two places that I would suggest to start. And these are like things to notice. So one of the places that you can start, if you're kind of wondering, what's my inner work? What inner work do I need to do? Is number one, noticing when you're not your best self. Okay. So my dear friend, Lisa Pratt Slayton, and I wrote a book called Life in Flux. And it's a book all about how to navigate transition, which takes a ton of inner work and takes a ton of maturity and wisdom. But one of the things that we write in there is that we can tell someone's doing their inner work when they move from reacting to situations to responding to them. The reaction is kind of that knee jerk, like, what's just going, and I'm just going to do it this way. Whereas a response sort of takes a step back, whether that's for 3 hours or 30 minutes or sometimes, honestly, 30 seconds. Can you take a step back? So for me and for all of us, there's all these moments where we're moving through the world reacting. Maybe it's not reacting for you. Maybe it's maybe it's instead anxiety, or it's just all these places where you're just doubt, right? All disconnect from others. These places where you're just not feeling at your best self. That's a place to engage and ask God, like, God, what might you want to do in that space? What would happen if I took a few deep breaths when I felt anxious? What would help if I took a few deep breaths and when I felt like I wanted to react to someone or yell at them? Or what would happen if I took a few deep breaths the next time I got mad at myself for the way I handled something? What would happen if I trusted that God wants to renew my inner nature? And just sort of getting curious about those moments when we're not our best self and how God might be inviting us to renew that day by day. The second, so if you're kind of like, what is inner work? How do I start? How do I even think about that? One is to notice where you're not your best self and to kind of press in. The second is to listen to the questions that are deep within. Okay, so I know you've all been there. Sometimes for me, this is like 3 a.m., right? These can be stirring questions. Sometimes it's the questions when I'm on a walk and like nobody else is with me. Just like, what's bubbling up? What questions what are sort of coming up in me? And those are questions oftentimes that are a really wonderful place to do and engage in inner work around. Again, sort of bringing those questions to God in prayer, in conversation with other people, going to the scriptures in daily readings with those questions in mind. Those are places. So there's just a couple places to kind of like, if you're like, what is inner work? Those would be places to go in. The bottom line is that discernment requires formation. Movement forward, our best selves, and I don't mean that in some hyper optimized individual way, but I mean it in the 2 Corinthians way. Our best selves require formation. So I'll also just name here 3 practices. These are 3 practices that come from 3 different people. And I would say they're more than a practice, but they're really phrases that encompass a lot of different practice. If you're kind of like, okay, I know what inner work is, but I would love some new thoughts or ideas. So there's actually someone who comes out of the business management school at Harvard, and his name is Ronald Heifetz. And he talks about this work of getting on the balcony. And he says that in a moment, when there's like lots going on, right? And we're in one of these like crisis leadership moments or just complexity and noise coming at us, Let's say there's a decision or there's dynamics that we can feel, or we're kind of overloaded and we don't know how to prioritize, whatever the recipe is. He says that the job is to, we're always on a dance floor when we're doing that. We're out there. I don't know what your dance is. Maybe it's the waltz. Maybe it's salsa. Maybe it's something else. I'm not a great dancer, so that's why I'm pausing at coming up with different dances. But you're out there dancing, and at the same time, you're out there as an actor on the floor, engaged in whatever scenario. You also sort of work to metaphorically come up onto the balcony come up onto the balcony so that you can get a different perspective, so that you can read what's happening in the room, and really importantly, see how your role, are you stepping on someone's feet and not even realizing it? Are you over here dancing to a tune when everybody else is in sync? Are there three people in the corner who just need someone to invite them in? Whatever it is metaphorically, just that little bit of a mental posture, which I use a lot in meetings, and I know other executives and professionals that I know use this as well, which is, okay, like we're in this, all this is happening. Well, what would I see if I was up on the balcony? Okay, so practice number one, getting on the balcony. The second is terminology that comes from Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman is a wonderful preacher and theologian. He does a lot with the inner work and sort of who we're becoming as people, particularly in the face of difficult questions or scenarios. And he has this phrase that I think is really powerful, and it's centering down. How might we center down amidst the noise that's all around of us? And that's a really visual image for me. I think about just like the traffic. He uses the imagery of traffic outside, right? Traffic outside. Let's say you're in an office building, or you're sitting on a bench in a city, or maybe it's trash day at your house. There's just all this traffic outside. What does it take in your body, in your nervous system, right, to take a breath and to sort of center down on what is good, to center down on the God who is renewing us day by day, who says, I got you. Yeah, the things of this world are wasting away, but who I am making you to be in my image is growing and renewing in maturity. So just that image of like, what does it mean to center down amidst all the noise? And I highly commend Howard Thurman's work if you're looking to get more into and kind of explore this idea of inner work. And the third phrase, so getting on the balcony, this image of centering down amidst the noise. And the third is the practice of paying attention, which that language comes from Ruth Haley Barton, who my colleague Chelsea Logan has interviewed for an article, a really beautiful double set article on discernment. But Ruth talks about paying attention, moving through our days. And it's really this eyes to see, ears to hear kind of passage that she's invoking here. But the simple question of, where is God? Can I see God at work? And if I'm listening and looking for God, what might I notice that feels a little bit different? And I like to think of it, and if you're watching this on video, I'm like kind of putting my finger up to sense like the way of the wind, or sometimes like the image I think is like I'm putting my hand down in the stream and trying to feel the current of like what's happening. And that sounds kind of abstract, but you go into the day, you start the day, and you say, okay, how could I pay attention a little bit more to where God's at today? And day after day, right? Day after day, this renewing of our minds and our inner world, that starts to stack up to something really interesting. So again, discernment in these complex moments, the capacity to recover in these complex moments, the capacity to be generous and empathetic toward our colleagues and neighbors and friends in the kind of moments I described at the top of the video requires formation. It requires paying attention to what's going on in our inner world and allowing God to day by day renew what's inside.